Materials are transformed throughout the life cycle. Minerals are mined and processed for use in manufacturing of intermediate components, then assembled into products that are sold for final use. At the end of life, when the consumer is done using the product, it's ideally collected and recycled, so the material can be reintroduced into the material life cycle. All of these transformation steps or segments are linked in supply chains, and most of the time we simplify the supply chains to a basic model with boxes and arrows. But in reality, supply chains are complex, non-linear, multidirectional, and interconnected. And the complexity of the supply chains makes them challenging to trace, and this makes it hard to see exactly who is part of it and how. In a supply chain, it's important to pay attention to what is flowing from one segment to another. We have materials flowing, but money is also flowing as the materials are sold and bought from one segment to the next. The process of deciding and drawing up which segments are part of a particular supply chain is called mapping. In essence, mapping supports us in defining the boundaries of the analysis. It shows us the processes of transformation and the actors that are part of the transformations. It's also important to consider where the transformational processes will take place. For instance, whether they are specific to a particular region or particular nation, or if they are undertaken across many nations or regions throughout a global value chain. The geographical focus is important because access to labor, energy, capital, or land vary significantly between regions and have a huge impact on costs. Laws and regulations also vary a lot between countries, and this also impacts why and how materials flow in a particular way. Despite the mapping of actors and links between transformational processes or segments in and across particular geographical areas, supply chain analysis couldn't explain all the outcomes of trade. For example, why some nations seem to gain relatively more from trading than others. To explain this discrepancy, Gary Gareffi and Michael Korzeniewicz developed the global value chain analysis, which originates in the work of Michael Porter and builds on supply chain analysis. And as the name suggests, the analysis focuses on coordination and control mechanisms. In the literature, this is called governance, which is defined in the Dictionary of Cambridge as coexisting forms of collective steering of social affairs by public and private actors. In other words, in addition to focusing on what is flowing in a supply chain, we look at the transactions and governance structures linking different segments. Governance arises from the transaction between a buyer and a supplier, as they are coordinating and controlling the exchange. So it's important to remember that any value visible in the form of traded materials, services, or monetary exchanges is the outcome of a negotiation. Governance describes how the negotiation of the transaction affects the buyer and the supplier. For example, one partner might be better off than the other due to the conditions or characteristics of the transaction. Focusing on these transactions enables us to find answers to why and how materials flow between segments in a global value chain, and what outcomes these transactions have for the different parties involved. And these types of answers are important when material flows and the trade of materials is analyzed, with a view to determining the winners and the losers.